Welcome back to the final chapter of my free full stack Spring Security with the React Employee Management Service course. If you missed the first 5 chapters, I highly recommend starting the course from the beginning, as you'll be missing important code and context for this final chapter of the course. With that being said, as always, I'm Ethan, or Unencoder, your favorite underqualified senior software engineer. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be uploading this course as a short series here on YouTube. Through the free version of the course, anyone can watch the course as each chapter is uploaded on YouTube and follow along line by line. However, if you want full access to the course and all of the course materials instantly without waiting, there's still time to purchase a paid version of the course before I release the course in its entirety on YouTube. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be providing a couple of paid versions of the course to grant you that access. The first paid option will grant you immediate access to the entire course, along with the private resources from the course at a fixed price of $15 through the course channel membership. This also grants you access to any other courses currently released at the time of you having an active membership. The second option will also grant you immediate access to the entire course and all of its resources at a price provided by Udemy. I will provide the link to the Udemy course in the description below, and I'll also attempt to run as many promotions as possible on Udemy to help you save some money on the course, but ultimately I will be allowing Udemy to price the course at what they believe it is worth. No matter which option you choose to follow along with, I please ask that you go ahead and leave a like on the course videos that you do watch here on YouTube, as it is a completely free way to support the hard work I put in to put this project together for you for free. And if you do want to see upcoming courses and other software projects, I would highly recommend subscribing, because I try to upload programming videos typically twice a week. Now with that being said, let's go and hop into our goals for the 6th and final chapter of the course. In the final chapter of the course, we'll bring in OAuth 2 resource server and configuring it for use with JWTs, and then we'll go ahead and configure our Spring Security to authenticate against said JWTs. Once we have our JWTs configured and tested, we'll also be implementing refresh tokens to allow the employee to refresh their JWT authentication tokens after timing out on the web page. On the front end, we'll be making some updates to allow us to send over JWTs in the header of each authenticated request instead of session IDs, and we'll also be implementing a timeout pop-up with the expiration of the JWT token so the employee can choose to either re-authenticate or log out if they have completed their session. Finally, we'll be implementing route guards in a React application to ensure the employees stay within the defined roles. With all that being said, let's go ahead and navigate our web browser to start.spring.io to grab the file dependency we need for our application. Now that we have the majority of our role logic and routes configured, we can add in the ability for our application to authenticate against JSON and web tokens and refresh tokens rather than session storage. To do this, let's go ahead and head back over to start.spring.io once again to go ahead and get our dependencies. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and add dependencies over here in the dependencies section, and then let's go ahead and search up OAuth 2 resource server. Let's go ahead and click on this, and then once we click on this, let's go ahead and click on explore. Here we're going to go ahead and we need to make sure this is under Maven instead of Gradle, and then we go ahead and add dependencies, or actually explore, I'm sorry. Then let's go ahead and scroll down to where our dependency is. Let's go ahead and copy this dependency, and then let's go ahead and hop into IntelliJ or whatever IDE you're using. And here, let's go ahead and close out of a couple things that we don't need. Then let's go ahead and come into our pom.xml. So let's see here, pom.xml, there we go. Then we're going to go ahead and come above all of our runtime. Let's go ahead and put it below the Spring Data JPA here. Let's save this, and then let's go ahead and reload our project. Once the dependencies are brought in, we can also go ahead and just restart the application, make sure everything's running. Now that we know our application is all set up and good to go, we can go ahead and move on to the next step, which is going to go ahead and be getting everything set up and ready to go to actually authenticate with JWTs. Now that we have the ability to generate and authenticate JSON web tokens with a personal OAuth 2 resource server, we need to do some configuration to actually generate said tokens. So first, we need a means to generate an RSA public and private key pair to create and sign the keys. So to do this, let's go ahead and create a new class inside a utilities package. So go ahead and make a new Java class. We're going to go ahead and call this key generator and utility. And there we go. Let's go and open up this project and hide our Explorer here. So the first thing we need to go ahead and do is declare a new public static method to go ahead and generate these keys. So let's go ahead and say public static key pair generate RSA key. Let's go ahead and import our key pair here. And then inside, let's just go ahead and declare a key pair called key pair. Below, let's go ahead and set up a try. We'll also go ahead and set up a catch. And then inside the catch, let's go ahead and catch an exception E. And then inside the catch, let's go ahead and say throw new illegal argument exception. Then we'll go ahead and come outside of the catch, and let's go ahead and say key pair generator, key pair generator. Let's go ahead and import our key pair generator here. And this is going to go ahead and be equal to keyPairGenerator.getInstance. And inside, we're going to go ahead and pass RSA. Next, let's come below our keyPairGenerator and call keyPairGenerator.initialize. Inside, we want to go ahead and pass 2048. We're going to come below and we're going to say keyPair is equal to keyPairGenerator.generateKey. Finally, let's go ahead and just return our keyPair that we just generated. Go ahead and give that a save. No issues, no errors. That looks pretty good. And that should go ahead and be everything we need to go ahead and set up our keyPair to generate and sign our JSON web tokens. So now that we have a way to generate a keyPair, let's go ahead and actually create a new object to store these in. So let's go ahead and open up our project once again. We're going to go ahead and come inside of our configuration and make a new Java class. We're going to go ahead and call this RSA and key pair like so, or I say key properties, and we're going to go ahead and create this new class. Then above this class, we're going to go ahead and say at component. Go and import that. Then we'll also go ahead and call it at getter. We'll also go ahead and set up at setter as well. Import both of those. Now we can come inside the class. Inside, let's go ahead and say private RSA public key, public key. Let's go ahead and import our RSA public key here. We'll also come below here and we'll say private RSA private key, private key. Let's go ahead and import our private key as well. And then we're going to come below and we'll say public RSA key properties constructor. Inside our constructor, we want to go and say keyPair is equal to key generate utility dot generate RSA key. We need to go ahead and import our keyPair. Maybe. There we go, and hopefully I imported this and created this properly. There we go. And then we need to basically go ahead and extract the public and private keys out of here. So here we're going to say this.public key is equal to a RSA public key, keyPair.getPublic. We also want to go and say this.private key is equal to RSA private key, keyPair.getPrivate. Let's go ahead and save this, make sure there's no errors or anything, and that should go ahead and do it for all of this. Now, the last thing we need to go ahead and do is actually configure our Spring Security configuration to actually read these JWTs. So let's go ahead and do that in our next section. Now that we have our RSA keys to generate and sign the JWTs, we want to go ahead and come back into our Spring Security configuration here. We want to go ahead and set up the resource server to actually read and authenticate the JWTs. The first thing we need to go and do is we need to come to the top here, and we need to go ahead and come in here. And let's go ahead and say private final RSA key properties keys. And then this is going to be mad at us because obviously we need to inject this. So let's come above the class and let's go ahead and say at required args constructor as well to inject that automatically. Let's go ahead and import that. And now we'll go ahead and automatically get our RSA keys from our RSA key properties, which calls our key generate utility and creates those keys for us. So now we need a way to actually encode and decode these JWTs. So I'm going to go ahead and come down here above our filter chain. And let's go ahead and say public JWT decoder, JWT decoder. Let's go ahead and import our JWT decoder here. Looks good. Above it, let's go ahead and pass in at bean and import that. And then inside, let's go ahead and open up this function. We're simply going to go ahead and return a Nimbus JWT decoder with public key. And then let's go ahead and import this Nimbus JWT decoder. Inside of with public key, let's go ahead and pass in keys.getPublic key. And then we'll go ahead and call .build. And that will go ahead and do it for our decoder. We also need a way to go ahead and encode our JWTs. So let's also go ahead and say public JWT encoder, JWT encoder. We need to go and import our JWT encoder. So let's go ahead and import that. And we also want this to be a component. So let's go ahead and say at bean. There we go. We need to go ahead and open this up. This one's going to be a little bit more involved. So first we're going to say JWK. JWK is equal to an RSA key.builder. Go and import the JWK here. We'll also go ahead and import the RSA key.builder. Then inside of here, we're going to pass in keys.getPublic key. Then we will call .private key is keys.getPrivate key. And finally, we call .build on this. So now we have our JWK. Then we need to go ahead and declare a JWK source of type security context. So it's going to say JWK security context JWKs. We want to go ahead and import this. This should come from security context and bring that in. And then here, this should come from Nimbus, so go and bring that in as well. This is going to go ahead and equal to new immutable JWK set. And let's go ahead and import this class. We might have actually imported this from the wrong place. So let's go ahead and come back up to our imports here. So this also should come from Nimbus. So let's go make sure we bring this in from Nimbus JWK. So if we bring this in, there we go. Now it's fine. Inside here, we're going to go ahead and pass in a new JWK set with the JWK. Then we'll return a new Nimbus JWT encoder with the JWKs. Let's go ahead and import this final class as well. And that looks good. That should go ahead and do it for encoding and decoding our JWTs, the final thing that we need to go ahead and do is set up the ability for our Spring project to convert our roles to, or not our roles, the scopes of our JWTs to roles to know what roles each person has or each employee has. So here we're going to go ahead and say, so now we're going to go ahead and set up a new method to deal with that. So we're going to say public JWT authentication converter, JWT authentication converter. Let's go ahead and import this as well. Above, let's go ahead and make this a component with @bean, and let's hop inside of our method here. We're going to go ahead and say JWT granted authorities converter. JWT granted authorities converter is equal to a new JWT granted authorities converter. Let's go ahead and import this JWT granted authorities converter. I might have spelled something wrong. There we go. And then we need to go ahead and tell the converter what claim to extract the role from. So we're going to go ahead and say JWT granted authorities converter dot set authorities claim name to roles. Okay, and we also need to go ahead and set the prefix so that our role logic continues to work properly. So to go ahead and do this, we'll go ahead and call JWT granted authorities converter dot set authority prefix to role underscore. Now we need to go ahead and declare a JWT authentication converter that we can call JWT authentication converter equal to a new JWT authentication converter. Here we're going to go and say JWT converter dot set JWT granted authorities converter to that JWT granted authorities converter. And finally, all we need to go ahead and do now is return that JWT converter. Looking good. Let's go ahead and save that up. Make sure we have no errors. I don't see any. Now we just need to do a little bit more work to set up our resource server and get everything working. So now let's come inside of our filter chain and below our request, let's go ahead and say .OAuth2 resource server. And here, let's go ahead and say server lambda server. On the server, let's call .jwt. Once again, we'll say JWT lambda JWT. And then here, let's go ahead and call .jwt authentication converter is JWT authentication converter method. There we go. And then let's also come below here. And we're also going to go and say .session management. And inside session management, we'll say session lambda session. And then we're going to go ahead and call .session creation policy is session creation policy .stateless. Let's go ahead and import the session creation policy like so, maybe. There we go, and save this, and that's looking good. So that should basically be all of the configuration we need to do. We also need to go ahead and get rid of our Spring security context. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this context security repository. We're also going to go ahead and scroll down here and get rid of the security context here as well, because we are no longer going to be using Spring security context. We're going to be using JWTs in a more stateless manner. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and restart our application, make sure everything is working fine. It's probably going to break because we are using the Spring security context and stuff like that in a couple places, but we'll see what happens here. Let's go ahead and restart, rerun. Yep, so we'll have to go through and fix a couple of things here, including the authentication service, because we're no longer using the security context repository. So in the next couple of sections here, we'll go ahead and fix that and get us back to a more stateless manner. Now that we have set up the resource server, we need to set up a way to generate and decode the JWTs that get sent to us in the API request. So to do that, let's go ahead and open up our project and go into our services here. Let's go ahead and make a new Java class, and we're going to go ahead and call this token service. Like so, and open up this token service. Above the token service, let's go ahead and annotate this with @service. Let's go and import @service. Let's also go ahead and annotate this with @transactional. Once again, import transactional. And we'll also go ahead and annotate this @required Args constructor to go ahead and bring in our dependencies. And once again, let's import this one last time. Let's come inside the token service. Let's go ahead and say private final JWT encoder is JWT encoder. Let's go ahead and import the JWT encoder. Like so, and then let's also go ahead and declare a private final JWT decoder, JWT decoder. Once again, let's go and import our JWT decoder. Looks good. Now we need to go ahead and be able to generate a JWT. Let's go ahead and say public string generate JWT. Inside of the generate JWT method parameters, we're going to go and pass in an employee. Let's go and import our employee from our entities here. Inside of the function, let's first go ahead and say instant now is equal to instant.now. Let's go and import our instant here. Then we'll go ahead and come below here and say instant expiration is equal to instant.now.plusseconds. Inside plus seconds, we're going to pass 60 times 5, which is be equal to 5 minutes. Then we'll come below and we'll go ahead and say string scope is equal to employee.getEmployeeType.toString. And then we need to go ahead and set up the claims, which will store the scope in. So we're going to go and say JWT claim set claims is equal to JWT claim set.builder. Let's go and import this JWT claim set. like so. Below the .builder, we're going to go ahead and say .issuer itself. The issued at will be now. Expires at will be expiration. Subject will be employee.getEmail. We're going to call it .claim with roles and scope. And finally, we'll call .build. So we go ahead and set up our JWT claims. Next, we're going to go ahead and return our JWT encoder.encode. Inside encode, we're going to go and pass in JWT encoder parameters .from claims. Let's go and import this JWT encoder parameters. And the last thing that we want to go ahead and do is return this as a string value. So we're going to say .get token value. Looks good. Let's go ahead and come below here. We also want to go ahead and set up an ability to split the token and then get the employee's username or email in our case out of the token. So to be able to get the employee's email/username out of the token, we first need to go ahead and get rid of the bearer part so we only have the raw token to work with. So first, let's go ahead and say private final string split token. Inside of the split token, let's go and pass in a string token as a parameter. We're going to open this up. We're going to say return token.split. Inside the split, we're going to go ahead and pass in bearer space. We want to go ahead and get the index 1 from this array. Now that we have our utility to go ahead and split those tokens, let's go ahead and set up the ability to get the employee's email from the token. Let's go ahead and say public string extract employee email from token. Inside the method parameters, let's go ahead and pass in a string JWT. We'll open up the method. Inside, we'll say JWT token is equal to JWT decoder.decode. Inside our decode, we'll go ahead and pass in split token with JWT. Let's also not forget to go and import our JWT here. There we go. And then finally, we'll go ahead and return JWT token.getSubject. And that should go ahead and do it for that. Let's go ahead and save this up. Now we have some work to do inside of some other functions, or inside of some other services and whatnot to make sure that we aren't airing out because we aren't using that session storage anymore. So let's go ahead and work on fixing that one in the next sections. Before we hop into our authentication service, we actually need to go ahead and create a new DTO to return back all the information we need when we log in, which is going to include things like the employee as well as the token, and then eventually the refresh token as well. Before we hop into our authentication service, let's go and open up our project here. Let's go into our DTO, make a new class. It's going to be a new class. It's going to be a login response. And then let's go and open this up. Inside our login response on the top, let's go ahead and say @allargs constructor. Let's import that. Let's also say @noargs constructor. Import that as well. We'll say @data. Import that, and finally say @builder. Let's import builder. Let's come inside the class. Let's go and declare a private employee. Let's go and import our employee. We'll also go ahead and declare a private string token. Now that we have a medium to actually send the information back to the front end after we log in, let's go and hop into our authentication service and set up the ability to actually use JWTs. Go into our project, go into our authentication service, and we need to go ahead and delete a couple things here. So obviously we are no longer going to go ahead and be using the security context stuff. So let's go ahead and get rid of those like so. We need to go ahead and get rid of this stuff as well. So we'll go ahead and delete this stuff with this. And I think that should be everything that has to do with our authentication security context. So now we're going to go ahead and come in below our private final password encoder. Or actually, I guess we'll come above the pay service because this is kind of where our service stuff is located. And let's go ahead and say private final token service. Let's go ahead and import that. We don't need to, that's fine. And then this isn't going to be an employee anymore. Let's go and change this to a login response. Okay, we need to import that. And now we need to make some changes. So instead of returning employee service.read employee by email, we're going to go ahead and just say employee is equal to employee service.read employee by email. And let's come below here and set up the rest of the stuff we need. So let's go ahead and say string JWT is equal to token service.generate JWT. Inside here, let's go ahead and pass in that employee. Then we'll go ahead and say return login response.builder. Then on our builder, we're going to say .employees employee. And we'll go ahead and say .token is JWT. And finally, we'll call .build. Go ahead and save that, and that looks good. So now with this setup and also the Spring security setup as well to read in JWTs and decode them, this is actually all we need to actually be able to log in an employee. But before we actually try to do all that, let's go ahead and create one more kind of utility type function, which will allow us to read an employee from a token. I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down here above the public void load users information. And let's go ahead and say public employee read employee from token. Inside here, we're going to go ahead and pass in a string token. Let's open up the method. Here we're going to say string email is equal to token service to extract employee email from token. Let's go ahead and pass in that token. Then let's come below. We're going to go ahead and say return employee service.read employee by email. Let's go ahead and pass in that email that we got out of the token. Let's give it a save. Everything's looking good. I don't see any errors. Now there is going to be an issue here because it's going to say that there's a problem inside the authentication controller, but we'll go ahead and deal with that in a second. And that's going to go ahead and do it for all the work inside of authentication service. The next section, let's go and hop into the authentication controller, fix up these issues. And we need to also make a small change inside of our employee controller / employee service as well to fix an issue with the authentication. And then we'll be able to go ahead and test everything out. Next up, we want to go ahead and fix the issue inside of our authentication controller that's leading to this. So I'm just going to go and click on this related problem. You can see here that obviously this isn't returning an employee anymore, and we need to go ahead and make some changes. So here, instead of saying public employee, let's go ahead and delete this and say public login response. Let's go ahead and import the login response here. And that should go ahead and fix that issue. Let's also go ahead and make a handler for that get employee by token. So let's go ahead and say public employee get employee by token. Here we're going to go ahead and say at request header. And then inside the request header, we're going to say http headers.authorization. Let's go ahead and import the http headers here. And then this is going to go ahead and be a string token. Above the method, let's go ahead and say at get mapping. Go ahead and import that. Inside the get mapping, we're just going to say slash. Then we can come inside of the method here. Inside, let's go ahead and return authentication service.read employee from token. Inside, we'll go ahead and pass in that token. Get this saved, and let's go ahead and try to run the application again now that we kind of got rid of all of the application context stuff. And if it still errors out, that means that we missed an authentication context somewhere. Cool, start it up. Now we do need to go ahead and make one more change inside of our employee service to be able to actually do our authentication. So let's go ahead and open up our project and go into our employee service. And this is going to be where we are load user by username. So let's go ahead and find that as well. So here we have .roles. Instead of .roles, we want to go ahead and change this to .authorities. Now let's go ahead and save that, and that should be fine. Let's go ahead and rerun our application once more. Everything is running as expected, looks good. This step is very important. If you keep this as .roles, whenever you try to go ahead and access like an admin or an employee role URL, it's not going to go ahead and work. So it's very important that you change that. Whenever I was going through some test run throughs, I forgot to change it and I was having a very, very bad time. Now that we should have everything all set up, let's go ahead and hop into Postman and do a couple of simple checks to make sure our authentication via JWTs is working. And all we really need to do here is just log in as each one of the employees and make sure they're getting back a JWT, and then ensure that each JWT that they're able to access their APIs that they're meant to, and then also not be able to access the APIs they're not to. So let's go ahead and hop into Postman and start out by logging into the admin account. Here we are, chapter 6. We're going to go ahead and go into our auth. We'll log in as an admin. Again, you guys have seen this several times now. So let's go ahead and log in. There we go. You can see now we're passing back an employee object. We're also passing back the token. Now I should have a global variable set up. So if I go into, I don't remember how to see the variables, but we have a script here that's going to go ahead and fetch the token out of this. It also tries to fetch the refresh, which we don't have right now. So we don't have to do anything crazy, but if you guys want to, you could just copy this and paste it in. So now that we have this, let's go and just try to read all the employees to make sure that our role-based authentication is still working for this. So let's go ahead and open up employees. We'll go ahead and just read all. And if we go into our headers here, you can see that we have a bearer token and an auth token. Let's go ahead and send this. So you can see we can still read all of these. So that looks pretty good. Then we can also go ahead and try to read all reports, which is a manager only. So we go to read all reports, which is a HTTP localhost 8000 /employee /reports to manager. This should fail because we are not a manager employee. So you see we get 403 forbidden. That's great. Now let's go ahead and log into the manager. So log in with the manager. You guys should know the URL by now. Log in. This looks good. We got the employee object and the token, and my Postman will automatically read the token. Once again, the script looks like this. If you guys want to go ahead and copy that down, you can. Or if you have purchased the course, it'll be included inside the Postman collections that we have. Now to go ahead and test that, let's go ahead and try the read all reports again. So if we go ahead and run this, you can see that we get that back, and that is working as expected. Now let's go ahead and also attempt to read all the employees once again to make sure we do not have access to this. So you can see our JWT is working properly there. So it looks good. And then finally, let's go ahead and log in as the employee. So log in as employee. There we go. Once again, it should read in our JWT token. Here in employee, we can go ahead and try to generate a timesheet. So let's go generate or get timesheet. We'll run this. As you can see, it generated properly. And then we can also go ahead and try to read all again, which is obviously an admin route and not an employee route. So we'll go to read all and try to save. We get 4 or 3 forbidden. So that is working good. Finally, the last thing that the employee should be able to do here and not get blocked is to get the employee information by token. And this is going to be so that whenever we are trying to re-authenticate on the browser, they can actually get their information back whenever they have a token. So it's going to get by token. So this is going to go to be http://localhost/auth/ is a GET request. And as long as we have a token, any employee should be able to hit this. So let's go and send. You can see that we get the employee's information back, and this is going to be useful whenever we refresh the web browser. We have a token, a refresh token there, and we get the information back. So that should do it for all of our testing at this point. So now we can go and hop back into our Java code and get our refresh tokens all set up, as well as set up the ability to actually log out of our application. Now that we are capable of generating and authenticating against JWT tokens, let's start working on our refresh tokens so that the employee can stay logged in, but the employees don't need to last forever. So to do this, let's go ahead and create a new class inside of our entities project, or inside of our entities package, new Java class. We're going to go ahead and call this refresh and token and go and open this up. Inside of our refresh token, let's go ahead and extend our base entity. And then let's come above where we're going to go and say @entity, import that. We're also going to say @table, import that. Inside of @table, let's go ahead and call this name equal to refresh_tokens. Looks good. Let's also go ahead and include @data, import this. We'll include @allargs constructor. We'll import that as well. Let's include @noargs constructor, import that. And finally, we'll have @builder, and we'll import that as well. Let's go ahead and come inside of our base entity. Inside here, let's go ahead and say private string token. We also want to go ahead and include a private instant expiry date. Let's go ahead and import our instant here. And above, let's go ahead and include @column annotation. Import @column. Inside, we're going to say name is equal to expiration. There we go. Then we're going to go ahead and come below here. We're say private employee. Above employee, let's go ahead and say @1to1. Import our 1to1. We also need @join column. Inside join column, let's say name is equal to employee_ID. And our reference column name is going to equal to ID. Go ahead and save this, make sure we have no errors, and that should go ahead and do everything for us here. And now that we have our refresh token set up, let's go ahead and also quickly update our login response DTO to also include the refresh token. So let's hop into our project. We'll go into our login response, and then below our private string token, let's also go ahead and include a private string refresh. And now that looks all good to go. And now we should be ready to go ahead and start setting up the ability to store these and also create them inside of our services. Next thing on the docket is setting up the repository. That way we can go ahead and fetch and delete these. So let's go ahead and open up our project here. We'll go into our repositories, make a new Java class, which will be an interface. Let's go ahead and call this refresh token repository. Like so. And then here we need to go ahead and of course say extends JPA repository. Let's go and import the JPA repository. Here we need to go ahead and have our angled brackets. We need to go ahead and pass in refresh token. Let's go and import the refresh token here. Maybe, there we go. We also need to go ahead and include the integer. There we go. Just for kicks, let's go ahead and also annotate this with @repository. Looks good. And then let's come inside. We need to go ahead and create a quick method or two here. So first, let's go ahead and say optional refresh token, find by token. Let's go and import the optional here. Then inside of this method, let's go and pass in string token. Let's also come below and say optional refresh token find by employee. Then inside this method, let's go and pass in employee. Let's go and import our employee here. Looks good. Save this up. And then that should be all the setup we need to be able to go ahead and create our refresh tokens and fetch them and everything else. So let's go and hop into the token service in the next section here and set up the ability to fetch and create these refresh tokens. The first place we need to go ahead and start creating these is in the token service. So let's go and hop into our token service here and start setting up the ability to create these. So the first thing we need to go ahead and do is gain access to the refresh token repository. So we're going to go ahead and come above here. Let's go ahead and declare a private final refresh token repository. Let's go ahead and import the refresh token repository here. There we go, looks good. And then let's go ahead and come below our generate JWT. And let's also go ahead and declare a public refresh token, generate refresh token. Inside of this, let's go and first, import our refresh token entity. And then inside the method, let's go and pass in employee. Then let's open up the method. Let's say refresh token is equal to refresh token.builder. Then we want to go ahead and say .employee is equal to employee. The token will be a UUID.random UUID.toString. Let's go and import our UUID here. There we go. Then we're going to say .expiry date is instant.now.+seconds. Inside the plus seconds, we're going to pass 60 times 60 times 24. And the reasoning for this is the refresh token will be good for 24 hours. Finally, let's go ahead and call .build. Now that we have our refresh token object, let's go ahead and say return refresh token repository.save. Then let's go and pass in that refresh token we just generated to save it and return it back to the user. Let's go ahead and save this up. Now we also want to go ahead and declare a method that will return a login response whenever we refresh our JWT. So let's go ahead and say public login response refresh JWT. Let's go ahead and import our login response here. And this is going to go ahead and take in a string token, which is our refresh token. Here, let's go ahead and say refresh token is equal to refresh token repository.find by token. Here we want to go ahead and pass in that token. If we can't find it, we'll say or else throw. And for the time being, we'll go ahead and throw a new runtime exception. Then we'll come below and we'll declare instant now equal to instant.now. We want to go ahead and check to see if now is after our refresh token.getExpiry date. So if our token is expired, we'll also go ahead and throw a new runtime exception. So if the token exists and it's not expired, let's go ahead and say string JWT token is equal to this.generate JWT. Inside of generate JWT, we'll pass in refresh token.getEmployee. And then we'll go ahead and return login response.builder. Here, let's go and say .employee is refresh token.getEmployee again. We'll say .token is JWT token. We'll say .refresh is token. And finally, we'll call .build. Let's save, make sure we don't have any issues. Looking good. And that should go ahead and do it for that. Now we have this runtime exception here. Let's go ahead and replace this with a custom exception called revalidate token exception. Let's go and open up our project, go into our exceptions, make a new Java class. We can make this an exception. We'll go ahead and say revalidate and then token exception like so. Let's go and open this up. So this already sets up one of these for us. Now let's go ahead and declare a public revalidate token exception no args constructor. Inside, let's call super. And inside super, we'll pass a message, refresh token expired, please authenticate. Now we can save our new exception here and we can go ahead and finish setting up our token service. So let's hop back into our token service here. And obviously we want to go ahead and replace these with revalidate token exception. So let's go ahead and delete this. And let's go ahead and say revalidate token exception : new. Let's go and import our revalidate token exception. I might have spelled something wrong here or it's just being a little bit slow. Let me double check what's going on with this. It looks like we spelled something. Revalidate token exception. Let's just go ahead and try to import it manually. So import com.unknowncoder.exceptions.revalidate token exception. And let's see if it brings in. Okay, it's just being slow. And then here, instead of throwing a new runtime exception, let's also go ahead and throw a new revalidate token exception. Once again, let's save this, make sure everything looks good. I don't see any errors here. And finally, we want to go ahead and make one last method to be able to delete the employee's refresh token whenever we log out. So let's go ahead and come here. Let's go and say public void delete employee's refresh token. Here we go and pass in employee. Inside the method, let's say optional refresh token is equal to refresh token.find by employee. Let's go and import our optional here. And then inside here, let's pass employee. Then we're going to go and check if token is empty. If that's the case, we have nothing to do. Let's just go ahead and return. Otherwise, we'll say refresh token is equal to token.get. Here we're going to say refresh token repository.delete. And then let's go and pass in that token that we got out of the optional called refresh token. Once again, make sure everything is working by saving. I don't see any errors in here, so it looks good. And that should go ahead and do it for all of this stuff. Now we need to go ahead and start making some updates to be able to finish working on our authentication service to use these refresh tokens. So in the next chapter, we'll go ahead and start working on that. Before we start working on our authentication service once again, I want to go ahead and set up a new DTO to enable the ability for the employee to update their password inside the authentication service. So before we hop into the authentication service, let's go and open up our project, go into our DTOs, make a new Java class. This one's going to be a record. We're going to go and say this is update password request. Let's go and open this up and close out of our project. Inside here, we're going to have a string password and a string refresh token. And then above, let's go ahead and also include @builder just in case. Let's go and import that, maybe. Import this, maybe if we can go ahead and get it to work. There we go. And save, and that's good to go. Let's go ahead and close out of some stuff we don't need anymore. So we don't need our token service. We don't need this, or this, or this. Let's go and hop into our authentication service and get to work in here. So now that we're ready to update this, let's go ahead and set it up to use the new refresh token. So first thing we want to go ahead and do is update the login employee method to also pass a refresh token whenever they log in. So let's come into the login and let's go ahead and declare a string refresh token is equal to token service.generate refresh token. Inside here, let's go ahead and pass in the employee. Then we want to go ahead and say .get token to get the string version of the token. Finally, we want to go ahead and also include this refresh token. So let's come below .token and say .refresh is refresh token. That looks good. Let's go ahead and save. Make sure we don't have any errors. There we go. Then let's also go ahead and set up the ability for the employee to refresh their password. So let's go ahead and come below this register. We'll go ahead and say public login response update employee password. This method will take in a string JWT and an update password request payload. Let's go and import the update password request and then open up the method. Here we're going to say employee is equal to employee service.read employee by email. Inside of read employee by email, we'll say token service.extract employee email from token. And inside we're going to go ahead and pass in the JWT. Next we're going to go and say string encoded password is equal to password encoder.encode. Into the encode method, we're going to go ahead and pass in payload.password. Then we'll call employee.setPassword to that encoded password. We'll also go ahead and say employee.firstTimeLogin is equal to false. And then finally, we'll say employee is equal to employee service.create or update employee. And let's go ahead and pass in that employee. Finally, let's go ahead and say login response refresh object is equal to token service.refresh JWT. Here we're going to go ahead and say payload.refresh token. And we're going to go ahead and say refresh object.set employee to the employee. And finally, let's go ahead and return the refresh object. Go and save. This method's going to be used whenever the employee logs in for the first time and then is asked to reset their password. The last thing that we need to go ahead and do is set up the ability to actually log out. So I'm going to go ahead and once again come below this method. Let's go and say public void logout. Inside, let's go ahead and say string JWT. And in the method, we're going to go ahead and say employee is equal to employee service.read employee by email. Inside the method, we'll pass token service to extract employee email from token. And once again, we'll pass in the JWT. We'll come below and we'll say token service.delete employee's refresh token and pass in that employee. And if they don't have a refresh token, then they're not authenticated and they're not logged in anymore. So that should go ahead and do it for all the work inside of our authentication service. Now what we need to go ahead and do is hop back into the authentication controller and make use of our refresh tokens. Now let's go ahead and hop into our authentication service and set up the rest of the logic for our refresh tokens. So inside of our authentication controller, let's go ahead and first go underneath our authentication service and let's go ahead and say private final token service token service. Let's go and import our token service here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and come below the @login and we're going to go ahead and say public login response refresh token. Inside the method parameter, we're going to have an @path variable. And then inside the path variable, we're going to say token. This will be stored in string token. Then we'll come above the public method and we'll say @getMapping. Inside the get mapping, let's go ahead and pass /refresh /curly braces token. And let's go and open up our function here. Inside the method, we'll go ahead and return token service.refresh JWT. And we'll go ahead and pass in that token. There we go. We'll come below here. And then let's also go ahead and do the update employee password. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and put it down here or maybe below register. This one's going to go and say public login response update employee password. Inside here, we're going to have @request header. Inside the request header, we're going to include HTTP headers.authorization. And let's store this in a string variable called token. We'll also include an @request body. And the request body will be an update password request that we'll call body. Let's import this update password request DTO here. Come above the method. Let's say @putMapping. And inside of putMapping, we'll say /password/update. Now let's go and open up our method. Inside the method, we're going to go ahead and return authentication service.update employee password. And inside the method, let's go and pass in the token and the body. Finally, let's go ahead and come below the get mapping. And let's go ahead and say public response entity logout employee. Inside this method, let's go ahead and say @request header. Inside the request header, we'll go ahead and include HTTP headers.authorization. Once again, let's store this in a string token variable. And then above the method, we'll include @delete mapping. Inside delete mapping, let's go include /logout. Let's go and open up our method. Inside, we'll go ahead and call authentication service.logout. Inside the logout method, let's pass that token. Then we want to go ahead and return response entity.nocontent.build. Once again, let's go and save that up. Looks good, no errors. The last thing we need to do is deal with the revalidate token exception. So let's go ahead and say public response entity string handle revalidate token exception. Let's go about the method and say @exception handler. And this is going to go ahead and handle our revalidate token exception.class. Go and import our invalidate token exception here. Open up our method. We're going to go ahead and return response entity.status. Inside the status, we'll say 401. Next, we'll call .body. And the body will say reauthenticate to continue. Once again, let's go ahead and save that up. Make sure there's no issues. It looks like everything is compiling properly. And now the final thing that we'll need to go ahead and do before we can actually test this out is add that refresh route to our unauthenticated routes, and then hop into Postman and make sure everything's working properly. As I mentioned at the end of the last section, the last thing we need to go ahead and do is hop back into our security configuration and set up the ability for anyone to go ahead and hit that refresh. So let's go ahead and hop into our security config and scroll down to our unprotected routes or unauthenticated routes. It's going to make a new ant path request matcher to /auth/refresh/refresh. Once again, let's go ahead and save this up. I think that's all we need to go ahead and do in here. So now let's go ahead and rerun our application to make sure everything is running properly. There we go. Looks good. Everything is working. So now let's go ahead and test out some new things that we just set up here. So let's hop into Postman. So let's go ahead and just close out of a couple of things here that we don't need anymore. So I want to go ahead and test out basically logging in, make sure that we still see our refresh token. And we also want to go ahead and log out. And we also want to go ahead and create a new employee. That way we can update their password as well. And that should basically be everything as well as refreshing the token. So let's go ahead and first log in as the admin and make sure we see our refresh token. So you see token and refresh. This one also has a script on it, like I mentioned, to go ahead and grab that refresh token. So now we can go ahead and start working. We have about a 5-minute window here before everything basically de-authenticates and we have to refresh, which is plenty of time. So now while we're logged in as the admin, let's go ahead and hop into our register. Let's go ahead and register employee 2. Let's go and save this. And I'm going to go ahead and we need to pass or grab this temporary password. So let's go ahead and copy this really quick. There we go. And now we can actually go ahead and try to log out. So we go to log out, which is a http://localhost 8000/auth/logout delete. Let's go ahead and run this. And you can see we get 204, no content. We logged out. Looks good. Now let's go ahead and log in as the employee. So here, this is going to go ahead and be employee 2, I believe. So employee 2, let's just double check that. We called it employee 2, yes. And then we have our password copied. Let's go ahead and paste in the new password, maybe like so. So now we have our email password and there we go. But we should see first time login to true somewhere in here. So this should be true. I don't know why it's saying false here. Maybe we have something messed up. I can double check that. But basically, oh, that's the reports too. So here, first time login true. There we go. So now basically what would happen on the front end is it's going to say, hey, you need to update your password because it's a temporary password. So now we can go ahead and go to auth and update password. So we have the old or the new password and we need a refresh token. So we can go ahead and go into this login employee and grab our refresh token. I guess I forgot to set up the refresh here. It is what it is. But we can go ahead and paste in our refresh token here to refresh that and try to update our password to PASS. So there we go. We got the employee back. That is looking good. And now we're going to have a new refresh token, or actually no, never mind, it's usually the same one because we haven't recreated it. So the refresh token is going to stay the same, but the JWT token is going to change. So once again, we go ahead and copy this refresh token once again and make sure that we can actually go ahead and refresh our token. So let's go ahead and go into our auth once again and refresh token. So this is going to go ahead and be to http://localhost 8000/auth/refresh and then use our refresh token. Once again, this is grounding it from the script. So in theory, if we have a refresh token, we should be able to hit this and it'll refresh our JWT. That way we can continue working after 5 minutes. So let's go ahead and hit send. Once again, we get our employee back, we get our token and our same refresh. So that is basically all the logic and all the updates on our backend. Please stick with me here through the rest of the course as we wrap up the front end logic and start setting up the ability to refresh our tokens and stay logged in. Back inside our front end application code, I would like to set up a simpler way to store and access our JWT and refresh tokens from local storage. To this, I would like to go ahead and create a new script in the services. So let's go ahead and go into our services. Make a new file. We're going to go ahead and call this use local and storage, whoops, maybe storage.ts. Let's go ahead and close out of our Explorer. Let's go and declare an export type to return out of this function. So let's go and say export type use local storage type is equal to an object. Inside the type, we're going to have a value, which is a string or null. Then we're going to have a set local storage item, which is an arrow function that returns void. Inside the arrow function, we want to go ahead and pass in value of type string. Then we want to come below this and also go ahead and declare a remove local storage item, which is an arrow function that also returns void. So that should do it for the return type of our use local storage hook. Let's come down below and let's go ahead and declare export default function use local storage. This is going to return type use local storage type. Inside of our function here, we want to go ahead and bring in a key of type string. Let's go and open up our function. First thing we need to go ahead and do is set up our state. Let's go and say const value and set value is equal to use state of type string or null. Then let's go ahead and import our use state. And inside here, let's go and set this equal to local storage, so get item key. Let's go ahead and come below. Now we can go ahead and start working with getting and setting these. So let's go ahead and say function set local storage item. Inside the function, we're going to go ahead and bring in a value of type string. Inside, we're going to go ahead and say set value with the value passed in as a parameter. We're also going to go ahead and say local storage.set item. And inside, we're going to go ahead and pass in the key that got passed into a use local storage hook, as well as the value that got passed in as a parameter set local storage item. It looks good to go. Next, let's also go ahead and set up a function remove local storage item. Here we won't take in any parameters. We're just going to go ahead and say set value to an empty string. Then we're going to go ahead and call local storage.remove item. And into this function call, we're going to go ahead and pass in the key. There we go. Next, we want to go ahead and watch for changes in our state. So let's go ahead and set up a use effect. Let's go and import our use effect here. Let's make it look a little bit better. Inside of here, we want to go ahead and watch for the key to change. Then let's come inside the use effect. And if the key changes, we're going to go and say const val is equal to local storage.getItem. Inside the getItem call, we're going to go ahead and pass in the key. Then we want to go ahead and check to see if val, then we're going to go and set value to val. So basically, if we have a value in local storage, we're going to go ahead and set that value. Otherwise, we'll just keep it as null/undefined. And then finally, let's go ahead and set up our return object. Inside our return object, we want to go ahead and return the value, set local storage item, and remove local storage item. Now if we go ahead and save, we shouldn't have any more compiler errors or linter errors. We're using everything and that looks good to go. That should go ahead and be everything for our use local storage item. We'll go ahead and use this inside of our global context eventually. But next we need to go ahead and make a few changes to the use Axios hook to be able to use it a little bit more efficiently. So let's go ahead and hop into there in the next section and get to work on that. Now that we have a simpler way to access the local storage values, we want to update the use Axios hook to have an authenticated request object and an unauthenticated request object. So let's go ahead and open up our use Axios hook here and let's start making some changes. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is inside of the use Axios function parameters, we want to go ahead and include an authentication type of Boolean and an optional token of type string. Then what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and make a change to our headers. So we're going to go ahead and delete this for now. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and say authenticated question mark and then do object or object. Let's go ahead and open up this first object here. So here, if we are authenticated, we're going to go ahead and have a content type of application JSON again. And then we're also going to go ahead and have an authorization, which is going to say token question mark, bear $ curly brace token, or an empty string. Then if we're unauthenticated, we just won't pass anything. That is fine. Then we need to go ahead and reset the request. To do this, we're going to go ahead and use a use memo hook. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this Axios.create. We're going to go ahead and say const request is equal to use memo. Let's go and import our use memo hook here. And then inside the use memo, we're going to go ahead and set up an arrow function that says Axios.create. And then inside the create call, we're going to go ahead and have an object. And inside the object, we'll have the base URL. And we'll also go ahead and include the headers. Then we need to come inside here. And we're just going to go ahead and watch for the token. So that looks good. Now we need to go ahead and return this request. Otherwise, it's going to be mad at us. So let's come down below here and return request. Now we can go ahead and save this. And it looks like all of our errors are gone. Everything looks good. So now that we have everything updated here, we're ready to finally go ahead and make some changes inside of our different services and context. So let's go ahead and do that in the next section. Now that we have updated the Axios hook to create an authenticated request object versus an unauthenticated request object, we need to update the authentication service to be able to use both types. So let's go and open up our Explorer and then go into our authentication service and get to work in here. So inside the authentication service file, let's go and update the use authentication service function parameters to take in an authenticated request and unauthenticated request. So here inside of this, instead of just request, let's go ahead and delete this. And let's go ahead and say authenticated request is an Axios. We'll also go ahead and include unauthenticated request, which is also Axios. There we go. So now we have both types. Let's go ahead and make sure we also include the comma. Now, obviously, it's mad at us because we aren't using these, and it's also going to be mad at us throughout the submit login and other ones because we need to update those. So now we need to go ahead and go through all the requests and update them. Now here inside the submit login, instead of using a request, let's go ahead and delete this. Now I want to go ahead and use the unauthenticated request. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this here. So now we have an unauthenticated request like so. It's going to automatically inject the token. Submit register needs to be authenticated. So let's go ahead and copy the authenticated request here. Copy this, go ahead and bring it into the authenticated right there and save. And that is good to go. So now that's all set up. So now what we want to go ahead and do is be able to update the login employee response. That way, whenever we go to log in, it's going to go ahead and fetch all of our information. That way we can go ahead and set the tokens and whatnot. So let's go ahead and hop into there. Let's go and open this up. We'll go into our types.ts and let's go ahead and find our login employee. So it should be in here somewhere. And I think actually it doesn't exist. So we're going to come to the bottom because we were just passing back an employee. So let's come to the bottom here and let's go and say export interface, login employee response. And inside of our login employee response, we're going to go ahead and include the employee. We're going to go ahead and include a token of type string. And finally, we're going to go ahead and include a refresh of type string. Let's go ahead and save that. That should be good to go now. Now we are ready to go ahead and start making some updates to our global context to be able to use this and go ahead and store our token and refresh to be able to be authenticated throughout refreshes and to be able to refresh our token to be able to stay logged in for up to 24 hours. Now that we have authentication service updated and we have created the new login employee response type, we can go ahead and hop into our global context and update the global context to use the new Axios hook and also store the token and refresh token. So let's go ahead and open up our Explorer. Hop into our global context here. So the first thing that we need to go ahead and do is add a couple of new properties to our global context type. I'm going to go ahead and put it at the top here just because it's kind of the most important piece of state. So above employee, I'm going to go ahead and include a token of type string or null. And I'm also going to go ahead and include a refresh of type string or null. And then between our pay stubs and our services, we're also going to go ahead and include a clear state, which is going to be an arrow function that returns void. And then we also need to go ahead and come into our global context reducers. And above our update employees, we're also going to go ahead and include an update auth, which is an arrow function returns void. And inside of our update auth function, we're going to go and take in a login response, which is a login employee response. All right, we can go ahead and save this. We also need to go ahead and import our login employee response. That is fine. So that is all looking good. So now let's go ahead and come down here and above our use Axios here, we're going to go and start setting up the storage and whatnot. So first, let's go ahead and say const object is equal to use local storage. Let's go ahead and import our use local storage here. It's going to be mad at us for a second. That's fine. Inside the object, let's go ahead and say value and alias it as stored auth token. We're also going to say set local storage item and alias it as set stored auth token. And finally, we're going to go and bring in remove local storage item and alias it as remove stored auth token. And then inside of our function parameter, we're going to go ahead and pass in token as the key. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. Come below, we're going to say const object is equal to use local storage with refresh. Let's come inside here. We're going to go and say value is aliased as stored refresh token. We're going to say set local storage item is aliased as set stored refresh token. And finally, we're going to say remove local storage item is aliased as remove stored refresh token. So that is going to go ahead and be our local storage stuff here. We're going to go ahead and move the Axios stuff down closer to where our services are. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this for now. I'm going to go ahead and come above our const employee state here. I'm going to go ahead and declare a const token and set token is equal to a use state of type string or null. We're going to go ahead and set the state to null to start. Then let's also come below the token. And let's go ahead and say const refresh and set refresh is equal to use state of type string or null. Once again, let's go ahead and set this to null. Looks good for our state. Now we need to come below our state here, and we actually need to go ahead and set up a use effect, which will check for a token inside of our local storage. And then if one exists, we'll go ahead and set the token in our global context for us. So let's go ahead and set up our use effect. Let's go and import our use effect here so it's not mad at us, and open this up. Inside here, we're going to go ahead and watch for our token and refresh state to change. And then if our token and refresh state change, we're going to go ahead and check to see if not token and not refresh. If these are null or undefined, we're going to go ahead and call set token with stored auth token or an empty string. We're also going to go ahead and call set refresh with stored refresh token or an empty string. Come down here. Otherwise, if we don't, we're going to go ahead and say set stored auth token to token or empty string. And then we're also going to go ahead and call set stored refresh token to refresh or an empty string. So this part here has kind of been like the bane of my existence, this entire project of getting everything set up, keeping our local storage in sync with our state inside the application. And this should go ahead and do that for us, because if it's out of sync, then it doesn't really work the way that we want it to. So that should be fine. So now we can go ahead and come down here where we're going to go ahead and set up our Axios. So let's go ahead and say const authenticated Axios is equal to use Axios. For the authenticated Axios, obviously we want this to be authenticated. So we're going to go ahead and pass true for authenticated. And then we're going to go ahead and pass in token or an empty string for the token. Then we're also going to go ahead and create a const unauthenticated Axios, which is equal to use Axios. Since this one's unauthenticated, we can just go ahead and pass in false for unauthenticated and forget about our token. That looks good. Now we can go ahead and work on our clear state. So let's come below here and say const clear state is equal to an arrow function. And inside, we're literally just going to go ahead and remove everything. So let's go ahead and call remove stored auth token. We're also going to go ahead and call remove stored refresh token. We're going to call set token with null and set refresh with null. We want to set our employee to undefined. We'll set employees to an empty array. Let's set timesheet to undefined. We will set timesheets to an empty array. Set payroll preview to an empty array. Set payroll to an empty array. And finally, set pay stubs to an empty array. This will basically go ahead and clear out and set our global context back to the default state here. Now let's also go ahead and work on our update auth. So let's come below here and say const update auth is equal to an arrow function. Let's come inside our function parameter and go ahead and say login response is a login employee response. We'll go ahead and open up our function. Inside, we're going to go ahead and say set employee is login response.employee. We will set our token to login response.token. And we'll also go ahead and call set refresh with login response.refresh. Now it looks good for our update auth. Now we need to go ahead and just do a couple more things. So let's go ahead and we forgot to go ahead and add something to our global context reducers. We also want to go ahead and add this update auth to our global context reducers. So I'm just going to go ahead and come in here. Actually, no, the clear state, I'm sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this clear state and bring it also in here. Like so. And then we're going to go ahead and come down here, and inside of our global context reducers here, let's go ahead and also include our clear state, and we'll include our update auth. Okay. And then we need to go ahead and update our services. So here inside of our authentication service, let's go ahead and delete this Axios request. We want to go ahead and include the authenticated Axios. And let's also go ahead and include the unauthenticated Axios. Here inside of our use employee service, we're going to go ahead and get rid of this Axios request and include the authenticated Axios. And once again, we're going to go get rid of this Axios request and include the authenticated Axios. Okay, now we just need to go ahead and update our object here. So here, let's come above the employee. Let's go ahead and include the token. We'll include the refresh, and we'll go ahead and come below our payroll or pay stubs and include the clear state. Let's go ahead and give this a save, and that should be all the work inside of our global context for this application, because we have all of our state, everything else for that. So now we can go ahead and hop back into the authentication service and make use of our update auth reducer that we created here to go ahead and store all the information that we need whenever they log in. We can also go ahead and work on logging out as well as working on updating their password. So I'll see you guys inside of our authentication service. As I mentioned at the end of the last section, we have wrapped up all the changes that we need to make inside of the global context for this project. Now that we've finished updating the global context, we need to go ahead and finish up the changes needed inside the authentication service. Let's go ahead and hop into our authentication service here and scroll back to the top. We need to go ahead and start by making some changes to our authentication service type. So let's go ahead and come down below our saving new employee, and let's go ahead and declare a logging out of type Boolean. Then we'll also go ahead and come below our submit register, and let's go ahead and declare a submit logout of type arrow function that returns void. Inside the logout, we're going to go ahead and pass an employee of type employee or undefined. We also want to go ahead and come below this function and declare a submit update employee password, which is also an arrow function that returns void. Inside this function, let's go ahead and pass in a password of type string and a refresh token of type string. Finally, let's go ahead and create one more property here. Let's go ahead and make a refresh employee, which is an arrow function returns void. And inside of our refresh employee, let's go ahead and pass in a refresh token of type string. Okay, so now if we save, it's going to be mad at us because we need to go ahead and create these new properties. So first off, let's go ahead and start out by bringing in our clear state and update auth from our reducers. So let's go ahead and say clear state update auth, because we're going to need these to update our state inside of our global context. Then we go ahead and come below our saving new employee. And let's go ahead and say const logging out and set logging out is equal to useState of type Boolean. Let's go ahead and start the state out as false. Then we need to go ahead and make a change to our submit login to actually store all of the auth information. So here, we're going to go ahead and come inside here. And the first thing that we're going to go ahead and do is say set logging out to false. Then we're going to go ahead and come, instead of update employee, we're going to go ahead and call update auth with the res.data. So we need to go ahead and set logging out to false because we're not going to have any employee information, and we don't want it while we're submitting the login to kick us back to the login page over and over again. So that's how we're going to go ahead and distinguish between, hey, we want to navigate back to the login page versus we're logging someone in, so don't kick us back there. Then obviously the update auth with res.data is going to go ahead and pass in that employee and both tokens that way we can store inside of our global context. So that looks good. So now let's go ahead and come down below here and we can go ahead and start working on the other functions. So let's go ahead and declare a const submit logout is equal to an async arrow function. Inside of our function parameter, we want to go ahead and pass in an employee of type employee or undefined. Let's go and open up our function here, set a try catch. Inside the catch, let's go ahead and say console.log e to make the linter happy. We shouldn't really run into any errors while trying to log out. Then we're going to go ahead and check if we have an employee. If that's the case, we're going to go ahead and await authenticated request.delete. We're going to go ahead and make a request to /auth/logout. And then after we make this request, we're going to go and set logging out to true. And we're also going to go and set loading employee information to false. And then finally, below our set loading employee information, let's also go ahead and call the clear state to go ahead and reset our global context. Go and save. That should go ahead and do it for our submit logout. Let's go and come below our submit logout. And let's go ahead and declare submit update employee password is equal to an async arrow function. Inside the function parameter, let's go and pass in a password of type string and a refresh token of type string. Go and open up our function here and set up a try catch. Inside the catch, let's start out by saying console.log e. And then we're going to go and say set employee authentication error to true. Now that we handled our error state, let's go ahead and come back in the try and let's go and say set loading employee information to true. We're also going to go and set employee authentication error to false. And now that our state's set up, let's come below and say const res is equal to await authenticated request.put. We'll go ahead and make this request to /auth/password/update. We're also going to go pass in an object, and then here we're going to have password and refresh token. And then if we get this back successfully, we're going to go ahead and call update auth with res.data. And we also want to go ahead and come below the catch and set up a finally block. Inside the finally, we're going to go and say set loading employee information to false. Let's go and give that a save, and that should be everything that we need to go ahead and do for updating the employee's password. Finally, let's go ahead and come below and set up a const refresh employee equal to an async arrow function. Inside the parameters, let's go and pass in a refresh of type string or null. And then let's go and open up the function. Let's go ahead and check to see if we have a refresh token. If that's the case, let's set up a try catch block. Inside the catch, we'll say console.log e. And let's also go ahead and call set employee authentication error with true. And let's come back inside the try. Inside the try, let's go and say set employee authentication error to false. We'll also go ahead and say set loading employee information to true. And now that our state's set up, let's go and say const res is equal to await unauthenticated request.get. Inside our request path, we're going to go and say backtick /auth/refresh $curly brace refresh. If the request is successful, let's go and say update auth with res.data. That should go ahead and do it for the try. Let's go ahead and set up a finally block. It's on the finally. Let's go ahead and say set loading employee information to false. Now let's come outside of our try, catch, and finally to where the if is, and let's go ahead and set up an else statement. If we try to refresh the token, we don't have a token to begin with, we're going to go ahead and call set employee authentication error to true. This function looks good to go. Let's go and save this up. Scroll down. Now we need to go ahead and export all of these. So let's go ahead and start out by come below saving new employee and export logging out. Then we'll come below submit register. Let's go ahead and say submit logout. We'll say submit update employee password. And finally, we'll say refresh employee. Let's go ahead and give this one final save. See if we have any errors. It looks like we do. So update employee we are no longer using, so we can go ahead and get rid of that to make the linter happy. Give that another save, and there goes all of our errors. So once again, that should go ahead and do it for our authentication service. And now all we have to go ahead and do is set up a couple of new forms, change a little bit of logic whenever we log in and log out, and we should be good to go to wrap up and do our final demonstration of the project. As we mentioned at the end of the last section, we're ready to go to start finishing up the rest of the components for our front end, as well as hooking everything up to be able to use our new authentication. So the first thing that we want to go ahead and do is set up the component that will allow our users to go ahead and reset their password to the very first time that they log in. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and open up our project here, go ahead and go into our components, make a new directory. We're going to go ahead and call this reset and password form, like so. Let's go ahead and go inside, make a new file. Go ahead and call this reset password and form.tsx, like so, and open this up. For this one, we're not going to have any CSS or anything, so we're going to go ahead and say export const reset password form is a react.fc arrow function. Let's go and open this up. Inside, let's go ahead and set up our return statement. And then inside our return statement, for the time being, let's just go ahead and render an empty fragment. That way we can go ahead and start working on the state and whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and come up above the return. Above the return, let's go ahead and declare an interface called reset password. Inside of reset password, we're going to go have a property called password of type string. And we're going to have a property called confirm of type string. Next, let's come outside of this interface and let's go ahead and grab the state from a global context. So let's go ahead and say const refresh and authentication service is equal to use global context as global context type. We'll go ahead and import our use global context here. Let's also go ahead and import our global context type as well. And then let's go ahead and come below here and set up some local state to the component. First, let's go ahead and say const reset password state and set reset password state is equal to use state of reset password. Let's go ahead and import our use state here, like so. And then let's go ahead and set up an object in here. Inside, we'll go ahead and set password to an empty string. And we'll also go ahead and set confirm to an empty string. Next, let's come below. Let's go ahead and declare a const password error and set password error equal to use state of type boolean. And here, let's go ahead and start this out as false. And now we're ready to go ahead and start working on our logic. First off, we need to go ahead and figure out a way to handle the changes in the inputs. So let's go ahead and say const handle password change is equal to an arrow function. Inside the function parameter, let's go ahead and pass in an E, which is a react.change event on an HTML input element. We're going to go ahead and open up our function here. We're going to go ahead and call set reset password state. Inside, we're going to have an object, and we're going to start by saying ... reset password state. Then we're going to go ahead and say square brackets e.target.name : e.target.value. That should go ahead and do it for our handle password change. Let's come down below. We also need to go ahead and handle submitting the reset password. Let's go ahead and say const submit password reset is equal to an arrow function. Once again, let's come inside the parameters. Let's go ahead and say E is a react.mouse event on an HTML button element. Go ahead and open up our function and first call e.prevent default just for good measures. Then we're going to go ahead and set up an if statement that checks for reset password state.password.length equal to 0, or reset password state.confirm.length equal to 0, or reset password state.password not equal to reset password state.confirm. Go and open up this if statement. If this is the case, we're going to go and say set password error to true. Otherwise, we'll set up an else statement. Inside the else, let's go and say set password error to false. And we're going to go ahead and call authentication service.submit update employee password. Inside, we're going to go ahead and password reset password state.password and refresh or an empty string. There we go. Let's go ahead and save. So what we're going to go ahead and do whenever we go to submit the password reset, we're going to make sure that we have a password and a confirm, as well as make sure that they are both the same. Otherwise, we're not going to go ahead and send that. Otherwise, if we have a password and a confirmed password and they are the same, we'll go ahead and send that request. That looks good. Let's go ahead and hop back into our return statement here. Let's go ahead and delete this empty fragment. And let's actually go ahead and replace this with a form component. Let's go and import this form component here. Maybe. Like so, and this come from ./form. Then let's go ahead and set up some stuff inside the form. So first, let's go ahead and say button text is equal to reset password. Next, let's set our error to password error. Our error message will be passwords must match. Let's set the action to handle submit password reset. Width will be set to 25 rem. And for our height, we're going to check for password error. And if it is true, we'll do 20 rem. Otherwise, we'll do 17 rem. Next, let's go ahead and open this up. This is going to go ahead and require some child components. So that's why it's currently mad at us. Inside, we're going to go ahead and set up some curly braces. And we're going to go ahead and check for authentication service loading employee information question mark. And we'll go ahead and render a set of empty fragments or a set of empty fragments. Here, if we are loading, let's go ahead and just clean this up a little bit and clean this, as well as this. There we go. And if we are loading, let's go ahead and delete this one and actually render a loading component. Let's go ahead and import our loading component. Then we'll go ahead and open up these fragments. And inside the fragment, let's go ahead and render a form input component. Once again, let's go and import this form input. And let's go ahead and open this up a little bit. So here we're going to go ahead and set type equal to password. The label will equal to new password. Name will equal to password. Placeholder is equal to new password. Content is equal to reset password state.password. And finally, handle input will equal to handle password change. Close, let's go ahead and render another form input. Inside this form input, let's go ahead and say type is equal to password again. Let's say label is equal to confirm password. Name will equal to confirm. Placeholder will equal to confirm password. Content will be reset password state.confirm. And finally, let's go ahead and set handle input equal to handle password change once again. Go ahead and save that. We have no errors, and that's actually all we should need to be able to go ahead and reset the password. Now, of course, we need to go ahead and set this up inside the login page to be able to actually use this. So in the next section, we'll go ahead and head over there and get to work on that. As I mentioned at the end of the last section, we're ready to go ahead and hop back into the login page and set up the ability for a new employee to go ahead and reset their password. So let's go into pages and then open up our login page. Let's actually remember to close this time. So we need to go ahead and update our global context. So after employee, let's also go ahead and bring in the authentication service. There we go. That looks good. And then let's go ahead and update the use effect here. So we're going to go ahead and say if employee and not employee.first time login and not authentication service.logging out. Then we'll go ahead and navigate to the employee portal. Like I mentioned before, the logging out is going to be used that way we don't accidentally keep navigating over and over again. So we'll go ahead and use that in a little bit. So now what we want to go ahead and do is update the return statement. So inside of our page here, probably inside the container center, we're going to go ahead and have a set of curly braces. And we're going to go ahead and check employee question mark dot first time login question mark. If it is the employee's first time login in, we'll go ahead and render a set of empty fragments, otherwise a set of empty fragments. Okay, let's go and clean this up a little bit, and we will clean this up a little bit later as well. So we're going to go ahead and bring this down here. Let's go and bring this down here and here and here like so. So if it's the first time they're logging in, we're going to go ahead and get rid of this, and we're actually going to go ahead and render an H1 that says reset temporary password. Otherwise, let's go ahead and copy this H1 here. We're going to go ahead and display company portal instead. Next, we're going to go ahead and wrap this login form inside of a set of curly braces. And then we're going to go ahead and check for not employee and. So if the employee is not logged in, we're going to go ahead and display the login form. And then below here, we're going to go ahead and have a set of curly braces once again. And we're going to go ahead and check for employee question mark dot first time login. And if that's the case, we'll go ahead and render the reset password form. Let's go ahead and import our reset password form here. And save this. Looks good. So now let's go ahead and hop into the front end and test this out. But we're going to need to go ahead and log in as the admin first because we already reset the password for the other user that we created. So let's go ahead and just restart the server, log in as the admin, create a new employee, log in as them, and then reset the password. So let me go ahead and restart the server really quick. Now that our server is restarted, let's go and hop into the front end. Here in the front end, let's go ahead and log in as admin, employee at company.com, and then PASS, log in. Fingers crossed everything is working. So far, we got all the information back, so it must be passing the token back as we expect. Let's go and click on new employee. We'll go ahead and call this employee and 2. We'll go ahead and just put like 444, 444, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Hopefully that's not already used. I don't think it is. Employee, it's going to go ahead and report to manager employee at company.com hourly, and then we'll go ahead and give them $30 an hour, I suppose. Let's go and create the user. Cool, let's go and copy this temporary password. Then I'm going to go ahead and paste it in a sticky note on the side. That way we can log in easily. Okay, let's close out of this. So now we may have an issue where we have to log out using the admin's token inside of Postman before actually logging in again, because it needs to go ahead and delete the admin token out of the database. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the inspect here, go into our application, go into our local storage, and copy this token really quick. And we're going to go into Postman, and we're going to go ahead and go into logout. I don't know if we actually need this or not, but for the time being, I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in like so. Bear, and make sure there is a space. Oops. Bear EY. Oh, I messed it up. There we go. And let's go ahead and try to log out. Fingers crossed we don't break everything. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and undo this really quick. That way it's back to where it was. And cool. So now whenever we go ahead and clear out of this as well, we need to make sure everything's clear. Should be able to go back to our login page like so. It's just very important that we go ahead and clear out that token from the database. Otherwise, if we try to log in again, it's going to be duplicated and break everything, which won't be a problem after the next step whenever we go ahead and log out from the front end, but just something to keep in mind if you're trying to test this. So let's go ahead and log in as employee2 at and then company.com. And then let me go ahead and paste in that password. So paste it in and log in. Fingers crossed it works. There we go. So now we have reset temporary password. So I'm just going to put in PASS and PASS. If we go ahead and put in incorrect passwords here, it'll go ahead and say passwords must match. So we probably should have done that in red, but it is what it is. I'm going to go ahead and put PASS there. There we go. And now we're in. So that went ahead and let us log in and reset our password. And then anytime that we go ahead and try to log in again after that, it should go ahead and use that same reset password. So that is looking good. That logic is great. So now we can go ahead and hop into the front end once again and set up the ability to actually click on the logout button up here and actually log us out. That way we don't run into any issues on the back end whenever we try to log out and then re-log in again with a specific user. Back inside our front end code, to be able to work on logging out, we need to go ahead and open up our Explorer. Let's also go ahead and close out of a couple things that we're no longer going to need. So basically everything that's open. And let's go ahead and log in or open up the navbar here, navbar.tss. And we need to go ahead and make a few changes. So first off, we need to go ahead and bring in some of our global state. So let's go ahead and say const employee in authentication service is equal to use global context as global context type. Let's go and import our use global context here and also import our global context type. Now let's go ahead and come below our const navbar items. And now we need to go ahead and declare the function that's going to go ahead and allow us to log out. So let's go ahead and say const handle logout clicked is equal to an arrow function. Let's go inside the parameters and say E is a react.mouse event on an HTML div element. And then just to be safe, let's go and open this up and call e.stopPropagation to start out. Next, we'll go ahead and say authentication service.submit logout. And inside the submit logout function, let's go and pass in the employee. That's all we need to do to go ahead and log out. Now we need to go ahead and come down to where our logout component is. Let's go ahead and set up an on click on this. That's going to go ahead and say handle logout clicked. So let's go ahead and save that. And that is all looking good. And that's all we need to go ahead and do to get the logout working. Now, the only thing that we need to go ahead and do from here is before we can actually test this, we need to go through and set up something called auth guards or route guards. We're going to have to do that inside of the layout page component. So we're going to go ahead and circle back to that after we finish up the rest of our other components that we need to create. So with that being said, next up, we want to go ahead and create a quick footer element to go ahead and put in the bottom of the page. So let's go ahead and do that in the next section. We only have a few more things to set up before wrapping up the entire project. And currently, like I said in the last section, we are missing a footer, and this should be pretty simple to set up. So let's go ahead and open up our Explorer here. We'll go ahead and make a new directory inside of our components. Go ahead and call this footer. And then inside of footer, we're going to make a new file. This will be footer.tsx, if I could type. And we'll also go ahead and make a new file, and this is going to be footer footer.css. Inside of our footer.tsx, the first thing I want to go ahead and do is input our footer.css. Then let's go ahead and say export const footer is a react.fc arrow function. Inside, let's go ahead and set up our quick return statement. And inside the return, we'll go ahead and render a div with a class name equal to footer. Inside our footer div, let's go ahead and have another div with a class name of center and text hover. And inside, we'll go ahead and render a font awesome icon component. Let's go and import this font awesome icon. We're going to go ahead and set the icon equal to FA house. We can go ahead and import the FA house like so. And then the size is equal to 1x. Looks good. And then below this, let's go ahead and render a p tag with 123 business lane st5555. We'll come outside of our center div and have another div with the class name of center and text hover. Inside, once again, we'll render a font awesome icon component. This time the icon will equal to FA phone and size will equal to 1x again. Let's go and import our FA phone like so. And then below, we're going to have a p tag with 111-111-1111. Let's go ahead and come below the div once again. We're going to have a p tag with the class name of center and text hover again. Inside, let's render company info. Below this p tag, let's have another p tag with a class name of center and text hover. Inside, we'll write reviews. And then finally, come below again, have another div with the class name of center and text hover. Inside, we'll have a P with follow us. And then below, we'll go ahead and render a font awesome icon. We'll set the icon equal to FA Twitter. Let's go and import our FA Twitter here. And size will equal to 2x. And let's come below and render another font awesome icon component. And here, let's set the icon equal to FA Facebook. Once again, let's go and import our FA Facebook here. And then we'll go ahead and set size to 2x again. Let's save, make sure we don't have any errors, and that should go ahead and do it for all of our footer component. Now let's go ahead and hop into the CSS and style this up. First off, let's go ahead and start out with the .footer class. Inside .footer, we're going to go ahead and set width equal to 100%. Height will be set to 5 rem. Display flex. Let's justify content space evenly. Align items in the center. Background color will be set to var -- secondary. And color will be set to var -- text secondary. Let's go ahead and save that. That is all we need to go ahead and do for this footer. Next up, we need to go ahead and create a timeout pop-up that I go ahead and say, hey, you have timed out on your session. So in the next section, let's go ahead and set that up before wrapping up all of the code for our application. As I mentioned at the end of the last section, now that we have our footer set up, let's go ahead and set up the next and last component that we're going to go ahead and need inside of our layout page. So that's going to go ahead and be that timeout pop-up that I mentioned. So let's go ahead and close out the footer component in the nav bar, open up our project here, go into our components, make a new directory. We'll go ahead and call this timeout and pop up. Go ahead and make a new file. This is going to be time and out popup.tsx. And go ahead and make another new file. This will be timeout popup.css. Let's go ahead and close our Explorer, hop into TSX. First thing, let's go and import that .timeout popup.css. Then let's go ahead and declare an interface called timeout popup props. Inside the interface, we're going to go ahead and declare a handle close popup, which is an arrow function that returns void. Inside the function parameters, let's go ahead and pass in an react.mouse event on an HTML button element. Looks good. Let's go ahead and come below our interface and go ahead and declare export const timeout popup is a react.fc arrow function. Let's come behind the react.fc and include our timeout popup props here. And then let's go inside the parameters and break apart those props by saying curly braces handle close popup. Let's go and open up our function. Inside, let's go ahead and set up our return statement. Inside the return, let's go with a div with a class name of column and timeout popup container. And now that the linter is happy, let's go ahead and work on the state and actions. So we need to go ahead and bring in some state from our global context. Let's go ahead and say const refresh employee and authentication service is equal to use global context as global context type. Let's go and import our use global context here, as well as our global context type. And now we need to go ahead and deal with re-authenticating as well as logging the employee out after they have declined to re-authenticate. So first off, let's go and handle the re-authentication. So let's go ahead and declare const handle reauth is equal to an arrow function. Inside our parameters, let's go and pass an react.mouse event on an HTML button element. Let's go and open up our function here and call e.stopPropagation just for good measures. And then come below, we'll say authentication service.refresh employee. And inside, we'll go ahead and pass refresh or an empty string. Once we have re-authenticated, let's go ahead and call the handle close popup. And then let's go ahead and pass in E as the event. Looks good. Let's go ahead and come below. Next, let's go ahead and handle logging the employee out if they choose not to reauthenticate. So let's go ahead and say const handle logout is equal to an arrow function. Let's come back inside of our parameters here and say E is a react.mouse event on our HTML button element. We'll go ahead and open up our function here. We'll go ahead and say e.stopPropagation once again for good measures. And then let's go ahead and call authentication service.submit logout. Inside submit logout, let's go ahead and pass in the employee from our global context. And similar to above, let's go ahead and call the handle close pop-up with E in it. Let's go ahead and save. Right now it's just mad at us because we aren't using these anywhere. So let's go ahead and put these to use and get the errors to go away. Let's go ahead and open up our timeout pop-up container div and declare another div with a class name of timeout pop-up. In here, let's go ahead and have an H3 that says your session has timed out. And we'll also go ahead and render a p tag with please authenticate or log out. Below this p tag, let's go ahead and say div with a class name of center and timeout pop-up button group. Inside, let's render a button component. Let's go and import our button component here. Open this up a little bit. We need to go ahead and pass in some props as well. Inside the button, let's go ahead and say type is equal to primary. And we'll say handle click is equal to handle reauth. Inside, let's go ahead and render a text that says reauthenticate. And then go ahead and come below the button and render another button as well. Go ahead and open this up and set up our props. We're going to say type is equal to secondary. And the handle click will equal to handle logout. And then inside, we'll go ahead and set the text equal to logout. If we save that, that should go ahead and get rid of all the errors. And that's all the work we need to go ahead and do inside of our pop-up. So let's go ahead and style this guy to make it look good. So to do that, let's go and open up our timeout popup.css. Let's go ahead and start out with the .timeout popup container class. Inside, we're going to go ahead and set height equal to 100%. Let's set a padding top to 2 rem. Next, we'll say the position is fixed. We'll fix it at top 0 and left 0. We'll go ahead and say flex direction is column. Let's align items in the center. Justify content in the flex start. And set the background color to RGBA 0,0,0.5. So to go ahead and do it for this class. Next, let's go ahead and say .timeout popup. Inside here, let's go ahead and set the padding to 1.5 rem. The background color will be set to var -- foreground. Let's set the box shadow to var -- box shadow. Set the border to none, and border radius to var -- border small. Next up, let's go ahead and declare the .timeout popup button group. Inside, let's set height to fit content, and padding top to 0.75 rem. And that should go ahead and do it for all the styling of this. So now the final logic that we have before wrapping up and doing the final demonstration of the project is to go ahead and put all of these new components into our layout page and then set up the route guard inside the layout page to block people from viewing sites or the pages that they're not supposed to. So finally, let's go ahead and hop into the layout page after this section and get to work on that. As I mentioned at the end of the last section, the last bit of logic that we have to do is inside of the layout page to go ahead and set up the route guard. So let's go ahead and open up the layout page here. We can go ahead and close out of our timeout pop-up as well, go into our layout page. And what we're going to go ahead and do is effectively create what is known as a route guard, which is basically just logic which determines whether the app should render a page based on some information. For us, this information will be things such as the employees logging in/out and what the employee's type is. So this is going to be very important to follow very closely along. And if something isn't quite working properly at the end, you might want to go back and just double check this. And I'm going to go ahead and try to be as careful as possible to make sure that I also do this properly as well. Because if something's not working at the end of this demonstration, then it might also be because I messed something up here inside of the route guards. Let's go ahead and open this up. And the first thing we need to go ahead and do is set up some more states from our use global context. So let's go ahead and also bring in the token, the refresh, and the authentication service from our global context. Now that we have this brought in, we also need to go ahead and set up a new type for the loading states that we are currently in. Let's go ahead and say type loading state is equal to navigate login, or navigate proper, or loading data, or completed. Next, let's go ahead and create a local state to store this in. So let's go ahead and say const loading state and set loading state is equal to use state of loading state. Let's go ahead and import our use state here. And inside, let's go ahead and set this equal to loading data to start. And then we want to go ahead and come below here. Let's also go ahead and set up a const auth timed out and set auth timed out is equal to use state of type boolean. And to start out, let's go ahead and set this to false. All right, looks good. Now we are ready to go ahead and get into the route guard logic. So let's go ahead and completely clear out the use effect here, like so, and also go ahead and clear this out as well. So let's go ahead and delete this. We'll go ahead and add some new stuff in here. So let's go ahead and re-add in the employee and token. Let's also go ahead and add in refresh. We also want authentication service.employee authentication error, as well as authentication service.logging out. And finally, also going to go ahead and watch location.pathname. So anytime any one of these variables changes, we're going to go ahead and run our route guard logic to determine whether or not we need to navigate the employee to a different place or if they're in the right location. The first thing we need to go ahead and do is check if they're logging out. So to do this, let's go ahead and say if authentication service.logging out. If this is the case, we're going to go ahead and set loading state to navigate login. And then let's go ahead and return. So pretty self-explanatory here. If we are logging out, we want to go ahead and navigate them back to the login. That way they can log in again. So next, let's go ahead and check to see if we have an employee logged in. And if we have an employee log in, let's go ahead and say const proper URI is equal to employee.employeetype.toLowercase. So this is going to be basically like manager, admin, employee, and so on. So then we want to go ahead and check to see if not location.pathname.includes that proper URI. So here, if the employee is logged in and they're not at the proper location that they should be at, let's go ahead and set the loading state to navigate proper. And then we'll go ahead and return out of our use effect. Otherwise, if the employee is logged in and they're in the proper URL, let's go ahead and set something else. Here, we don't need to do anything, so we're just going to set loading state to completed. And then here, since we are logged in the correct portal, we also want to go ahead and start the countdown until our timeout pop-up basically pops up and tells us to reauth. Let's also go ahead and say set timeout. Inside the set timeout, we're going to go ahead and call set auth timed out to true. And then we're going to go ahead and set this to 1000 times 60 times 5, which will be 5 minutes. So once we are for sure completed and we're in the right spot, let's go ahead and start a countdown for 5 minutes. It'll go ahead and tell us when we need to go ahead and re-authenticate our token. Now we'll go ahead and come below our set timeout. We want to go ahead and set up one more if statement checking if the location name is equal to portal/employee/timesheets. If this is the case, then the employee just landed on the timesheet page after refreshing or coming back in. So we need to go ahead and refresh your timesheets. So let's go ahead and call the payService.fetchCurrentTimesheet function. Let's go ahead and pass in the employee here. And finally, we'll come outside this if and set up the return to go ahead and exit out of the use effect. Next, we need to go ahead and come outside the if statement for the employee. And now we need to go ahead and wait for the token to be loaded in from local storage into our context. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and say if token is equal to null and refresh is equal to null. If this is the case, let's go ahead and set loading state equal to loading data. And then we'll simply go ahead and return out of the use effect. Then we'll come outside of here. We want to go ahead and check to see if the token is an empty string, which means it was set manually as an empty string. If the token is an empty string, we want to go ahead and set loading state to navigate login. The reasoning for this is because we went and looked for a token and we didn't find anything, so we went ahead and set it as an empty string rather than null. And then since we know it's an empty string, we know that we never found anything and we're not authenticated. So now let's go ahead and simply return out of this use effect after navigating us to the login. There we go. And then next we need to go ahead and add and check for if there was an authentication service employee authentication error, which means that the employee's refresh token has completely expired and they need to go ahead and re-authenticate. So we're going to go ahead and say if authentication service.employee authentication error. Inside, we'll go ahead and set loading state to navigate login again. We also want to go ahead and make sure that all the employees' data is wiped out of our context. So let's also go ahead and call authentication service.submit logout. We'll go ahead and pass in that employee. And once that's complete, let's go ahead and return out of the use effect again. And finally, we have one more check to see if the token and refresh is in local storage. Let's go ahead and say if token and refresh. If we grabbed a token and refresh token from our local storage, we want to go ahead and say set loading state to loading data. Then we want to go ahead and call authentication service.refresh employee with the refresh token. And finally, we'll go ahead and return out of our use effect. Go ahead and save that. That should go ahead and do it for this. Let's just go ahead and run through this logic one more time so we kind of understand what's going on here. So first, whenever we go ahead and see that something inside of the state array change, we're going to go ahead and check to see if we're logging out. If that's the case, we'll just go ahead and navigate to log in. And then if we get past this check, we'll go ahead and see if we have an employee inside of our context. If we do, we'll go ahead and see what the proper URI is supposed to be. We'll go ahead and check to see if they're at the proper URI. If they're not, we'll go ahead and navigate them to the proper URI. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and say, hey, we're where we're supposed to be. We'll start a countdown for the timeout pop-up, and we'll also go ahead and see if we're at their timesheets. If they're at their timesheets, we'll go ahead and fetch that timesheet for them. Then we'll go ahead and do a check. If we got through those two, that'll go ahead and check to see if we have a token and a refresh. If we don't, that means we need to go ahead and load it. So we'll go ahead and set this to loading data. And then we'll also go ahead and check to see if we set the token to an empty string. If we set to an empty string, we didn't find anything. So that means that we were never logged in the first place. We go ahead and navigate back to login. Next check, we'll go ahead and see if we have an error inside the employee authentication. So if there's an authentication error, that means that our token wasn't proper. So that means we need to go ahead and navigate back to login, also clear out the information and return. And then the final check will be if we have a token and a refresh, then we need to go ahead and refresh the employee after we've refreshed the page or logged in. That is all the logic inside of our use effect. Now we need to go ahead and set some stuff up to be able to authenticate, as well as also to be able to pop up everything that we need. So let's go ahead and go below here, and we're going to go ahead and declare a const authenticate equal to an arrow function. Inside the authenticate, we're going to go ahead and switch on loading state. And inside here, we're going to go ahead and set up different cases for each one of our loading state to go ahead and authenticate and navigate to where we need to be. So first off, we're going to go ahead and have a case for navigate login. For navigate login, let's go ahead and return a navigate component. Let's go and import our navigate here from React Router DOM. And this is going to go ahead and be /, and let's replace as well. Next, let's come below this case and go ahead and say case for navigate proper. And here, we're going to go ahead and return navigate once again. This one's going to be 2 backticks /portal / curly brace employee .employee type .2 lowercase. And once again, we'll set replace. Next up, let's go ahead and set up a case for loading data. And for loading data, let's go ahead and return a loading spinner. Let's go and import our loading here like so. Then finally, let's go ahead and set up a default case. Inside the default case, let's go ahead and set up a return statement. Inside the return, we're going to go ahead and render a div with a class name, layout page, and page. Inside, we're going to go ahead and have curly braces, auth timed out and. If our auth timed out, let's go ahead and render a timeout pop-up component. Let's go and import this timeout pop-up component. Then we need to go ahead and set props. So we're going to go ahead and say handle close pop-up is equal to an arrow function that calls set auth timeout to false. Next, we're going to go ahead and come below here. And basically, all we're going to go ahead and do is copy this employee and navbar. So let's go ahead and copy this and paste it up here as well. Next, we'll also go ahead and copy this employee and with this H1 in style. Let's go ahead and paste it in there as well. Let's go ahead and just clean this up a little bit to look a little bit prettier and it doesn't look horrible. So go ahead and do that. We're also going to go ahead and take this outlet as well. So let's go ahead and copy this outlet below here. And then finally, let's also go ahead and render a footer component. Let's go ahead and import our footer component like so. Looks good. And then we need to go ahead and delete everything out of this return statement and then have a set of fragments here. Inside the fragments, we're going to go ahead and have curly braces and we're going to go ahead and call the authenticate method. So now we can go and save. And now what's going to happen anytime some things change inside of our application, we're going to go ahead and make sure that the user is in the correct place by checking all of this logic. So that'll go ahead and do it for all of the code inside of our application, assuming that I set everything up properly. So here in the next section, let's go ahead and hop into the front end and make sure everything's working properly, including the timeout pop-up and everything else. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up the course there. So let's go ahead and open up our application one last time and do a quick walkthrough of all of our features and make sure everything is still working as expected and that our refresh pop-up and re-authentication is also working. So we're going to go ahead and do the entire flow. So let's go ahead and restart our application one more time. Our application is restarted. Let's go ahead and open up our application in the browser. And let's just go ahead and close out of this here. Open this. The first thing that we want to go ahead and do is log in as the admin employee. So I'm going to say admin employee at company.com and PASS. Let's log in. There we go. We're logged in. Now I'm simply just going to go ahead and wait for 5 minutes and make sure that our timeout pop-up is going to pop up properly.
5 minutes later.
So as we can see, our timeout pop-up has shown up. So now we have the option to re-authenticate or log out. So let's go ahead and just test to make sure we can re-authenticate by clicking re-authenticate. So we are still here. Let's actually make sure we re-authenticated. So let's go ahead and create a new employee. We'll go ahead and say employee and 2. Once again, we'll go ahead and set up the employee contact as 333-333-1234. Actually, I think this needs to be 4. So 444-444-1234. Employee reports to manager employee at company.com. And then we'll go ahead and hourly in 30. Let's go ahead and create employee. It went through. Let's also go ahead and copy this temporary password and paste it down so I can have it later. Cool. We can go ahead and close out of this modal. Next, let's go ahead and just update the first employee's information to make sure we can still do that. So employee 1, click edit. So we can go ahead and update maybe their name. So we'll go ahead and say first and employee. Let's try to remember that we updated this to first employee. Update, it updated properly. And maybe let's go ahead and give them a bump to 2750. Update pay. That also updated, so that looks good. So now let's go ahead and wait once again for that pop-up to open up and try to log out and make sure that's also working as expected.
5 minutes later.
Once again, we can see the session timeout pop-up has popped up again. Let's go and click log out. You can see that it navigates us back to the company portal. Perfect. Let's go ahead and log into the employee 2 account and set some stuff up. So employee 2 and then at company.com. And then let's go ahead and paste in that password. Hopefully I remembered to copy the password properly. Log in. Cool. So it says reset temporary password. To go ahead and say pass and PA just to make sure that this is still working. Terrific. Go ahead and put pass in there again. And we are in. Terrific. So now let's go ahead and update the contact information. So let's go ahead and click edit. We go ahead and add in here. Let's say 123 and workplace. Address line 2. We'll go ahead and say APT 123. City, let's go ahead and say grind town, like so. State will go ahead and be Texas, just because that's where I live. And then zip code will be 12345. Let's go ahead and try to update the contact info. Okay, so that worked properly. That looks good. Obviously, we don't have any year-to-date earnings because we need to go ahead and basically create all of those timesheets for them. So maybe we'll do that later. We can also go ahead and see kind of what our footer looks like. So that's cool. But next, let's go ahead and submit and create a timesheet. So let's go ahead and click on timesheets. It fetches our timesheet. Let's go ahead and just put 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, and 8 hours for a total of 40. Go ahead and save those. It changes to saved, submit. It changed to submitted. Looks good. So now let's go ahead and test out our logout button. So we go ahead and click log out. It takes us back to the login page. Terrific. So let's go ahead and also log in to employee 1 at company.com. And then PASS, log in, and it looks like maybe it didn't clear, or, oh, you know what? It's actually first employee. I knew I was going to forget. There we go. Now we're logged in. We changed it to first employee. Let's go ahead and we already updated some personal information and stuff inside some other ones. So let's also go into timesheets and create a timesheet. Let's go ahead and create this one with overtime so it gets denied. So let's say we worked 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, and then 4 hours for 44. Let's go ahead and save and submit. And there we go. So now let's go ahead and log out and then log in as the manager. So manager employee at company.com, like so. Go ahead and put in PASS and log in. So now we can see our reports. We can open this up to see their contact information. So it looks good. We can go ahead and go to employee timesheets. So here, first employee has 44 hours and employee 2 has 40 hours. Let's go ahead and approve this one. Let's go ahead and deny this one. And let's go ahead and say no overtime this week and go ahead and submit that. So that is looking good. We can also go to manage self and see the same information as those others. So let's go ahead. So that is looking good. So now let's go ahead and log out of this account and let's log back into first employee. Employee at company.com. If I could type, that'd be cool. Oh my goodness. And then go ahead and pass as well and send. Now we can go back to the timesheets. We can see that this was denied and the reasoning was because no overtime this week. So let's go ahead and close out of this and put 0 back in there. Let's go ahead and save this. It goes back to saved and then submit. Once again, we can go ahead and log out. And let's go ahead and log back into the manager employee. So manager employee at company.com and then PASS to log in. We can go back to timesheets. We can see that they fixed it. Now they only have 40 hours. Let's go ahead and submit. So there we go. So now let's go ahead and run some payroll, create some new pay stubs, and take a look at everything. So let's log out once again. Let's log in to the admin employee, employee at company.com and pass. Cool. So now let's go ahead and preview the payroll. So we can see that we have the admin employee making about 1,500, manager making about 19, employee 2 making about 12, and then first employee making about 1,000. So it looks like we have all our employees here. Looks like we can go ahead and run the payroll. Let's go ahead and run the payroll like so. Looks good. Everyone got paid. Now if we go to manage self, we should be able to see a year-to-date earnings. Let's also go ahead and log out. And then I'm going to go ahead and hop into Postman in the background and create some timesheets and some pay stubs for employee 1 and go ahead and make sure that's looking good as well. I have now generated a bunch of pay stubs for employee 1 or first employee. So let's go log into first employee at company.com and let's also go ahead and put in PASS for their password and log in. So now we can go ahead and see their year-to-date earnings is about 35,205 and we can go ahead and see some random timesheets generated. So here I think that we forgot to go ahead and sort these, or the sorting didn't quite work. So you guys can go ahead and look into that. I'm not going to take the time to go through and sort these differently, but that might be a good exercise for y'all. But you can go ahead and see that we have a whole bunch of timesheets and we can see what they made this year. And then we could also go ahead, if you wanted to, go through and set it up to be able to click through each year. You can go ahead and maybe do like a little drop down over here to say like years 2025, 2024, so on and so forth. That might also be a good little activity for you guys to do as well after this is over. That is everything we wanted to complete for our entire course. In the final chapter, we went ahead and brought in our OAuth 2 resource server dependency into our project and configured Spring Security to use it to authenticate against JWT tokens that we generated. We also set up refresh tokens for employees to use to re-authenticate once those JWT tokens have expired. And finally, we updated the React application to work with JWTs rather than with the old session IDs that we were working with previously. We set up logic for our pop-up to appear as soon as the JWT expired, asking the employee if they want to re-authenticate or just log out. And we set up some logic in regard to routing throughout the application to ensure that only logged in employees can view their portals and ensure that the logged in employees only gain access to the portals that they're supposed to have access to. As mentioned earlier in the video, if you would like access to the entire course before I release the full edit on YouTube, including all of the code and materials which comes along with it, there are two ways that you could achieve this. You can either purchase the course over at Udemy, which I will go ahead and leave the link in the description below. Udemy will be setting the prices to see fit for the content, but I will attempt to run as many promotions/coupons in the course as I can. The second option is to subscribe to the course level membership on the channel. This will grant you access to the entire course plus access to the private GitHub repository with all of the code. This is going to be a flat $15 and you only need to be a member for a single month while this course is out to gain access, and then you can go ahead and decline to renew anytime that you see fit. Of course, if neither of these options work for you, I obviously upload all the videos incrementally here on YouTube, and I'll also go ahead and be releasing the full video here in a couple weeks so you can also follow along with if you want to go back through. But what I do ask for is if you did go ahead and watch through all of the videos, I do really wish you would go ahead and like and comment on each of the videos, as it really help with the reach of the course. If you want to go ahead and see more programming content similar to this, I would also highly recommend subscribing. I am planning on releasing the entire course in a one long video here in a week or two after this final chapter is released to go ahead and give some of those who want to follow along with each chapter the time to do so. But with all that being said, this has been Ethan Coder. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all in my next video.